I'm going to show you how I improved this person and this person's anterior pelvic tilt and posture with just one exercise, and it may blow your mind. Now this video is going to sound crazy to some people and it's going to ruffle some feathers with others, but I want you to experience this for yourself because many people can and many people will. I've gotten the best results improving someone's anterior pelvic tilt and their overall posture by just addressing one side of their body and not both. But that may seem crazy to you because anterior pelvic tilt literally means both sides of the pelvis are forward and both sides of the rib cage are flared up to some extent. This is why it's time for a little perspective shift. Now, anterior pelvic tilt is representing extension within the low back and extension within the body. The more extended someone is, generally the less I see them be able to rotate from side to side. And the person that can't rotate from side to side is not going to be able to effectively shift their center of mass from side to side within the gait cycle, and they're more likely to be locked into a pattern of asymmetry. But when we have an asymmetrical pattern present, as almost everyone does, then we're going to have one side of the pelvis move forward relative to the other. We're going to have, let's say, the left side move forward, and the more forward the left side goes, eventually the right side comes with it. So what I'm trying to say is, in the presence of anterior pelvic tilt, one side is almost always relatively more forward than the other. So now we need to ask, why is one side of the pelvis more forward than the other? Well, what that represents is two main things. The first is that they probably can't effectively shift that side of the pelvis back and get into, let's say, the left side. That is one indication right there. The second indication is that them pushing their pelvis forward on that side is creating an environment where they can more easily push their center of mass forward in space. In my experience, what I've seen is that the less someone is able to effectively shift their body and their center of mass from side to side within the gait cycle fluidly and effectively, the more extended they tend to be. Now, extension, from my perspective, is a strategy to push ourselves forward and put force into the ground to propel ourselves forward. Because with a neutral pelvis, you can see how I'm nice and stacked. My hip sockets are facing in this direction right here. But if I were to push my pelvis down to the ground like that, that allows me to push my hip sockets closer to the ground and put force into the ground to propel myself forward. But the problem is now I'm using my low back to do it a lot. But if you can improve the body's ability to effectively shift their center of mass from side to side, all of a sudden you don't give the body a reason to be in an anterior pelvic tilt in the first place. It's doing that because it feels like it has to. The body's not stupid. It's doing that because it's seeking a way for you to push yourself forward. Now let me make this very clear. I don't think anterior pelvic tilt in and of itself is a problem that needs to be fixed in everyone, because if it was, everyone, and that's most people that have anterior pelvic tilt, would be in a good bit of pain. But the research doesn't show that. However, I do think that anterior pelvic tilt can be associated with certain movement limitations that build up over time, which then can result in pain alongside some other considerations. So if you feel like you have significant movement restrictions and or low back pain, potentially hip pain, knee pain, this may be part of the equation. So this is why I do want to address it to some extent. The exercise that I used with these people is a side-lying exercise designed to help get the pelvis to rotate back, but more so on one side, significantly more than the other. And what that's going to do is, again, let's say that left side of the pelvis is really far forward because that side of the pelvis is the one seeking more of the propulsive strategy. If we get that to come back, then the other side tends to come back with it, and they tend to improve their posture. Now, the main muscles we're going to go after here are the obliques, because these muscles, when you have an anterior pelvic tilt, are in a lengthened position. But if you can get them to contract, that's going to pull these two things together, and it's going to get a more posteriorly rotated pelvis position. So if I've determined that the left side of their pelvis is forward, I'm going to do this in left side lying. Same thing would go for right side lying. You may be wondering, well, how do I know which side of my pelvis is more forward? I have an extensive video on that, which is the lateral pelvic tilt video and guide I put out earlier last year, and it is a fantastic resource for determining which side of your pelvis is forward and what your pelvis overall's position looks like. A way you can easily tell that is to lay on your back on the ground with your legs extended. And then do this exercise and lay on the ground with your feet extended again, and notice if your low back doesn't feel a little bit flatter on both sides. That is a really good and easy way to tell that you have less anterior pelvic tilt. And obviously you could take pictures before and after and standing as well. Here's the exercise. I recommend doing it for about 2 to 3 sets of 8 slow breath cycles. And the most important thing, guys, is that you do not engage your neck or low back during this exercise. If you are, you're probably trying too hard. Less is more here. Please trust me on that. Do not push yourself too hard. Think 3 out of 10 effort, and make sure your breathing is good. If you're doing that, it's a pretty simple exercise, and this does help people feel a little bit more symmetrical afterwards, but also their anterior pelvic tilt tends to improve as well. This is the 90-90 sideline grounding exercise from Applied Integration Academy. What we're gonna do to set up for this exercise is we're gonna get in a 90-degree bend at both our hips and our knees, laying on our side. Now, we have an object deep in our groin, basically as far back as it can possibly go without being in any sort of discomfort. And then we're gonna make sure we have a pillow generally folded in half, so that way we can have our head slightly tilted towards the upside right there. So the pillow is underneath his right side, so his head would be tilted slightly towards the left. And that doesn't mean he's shrugging his shoulder, that just means that his neck is relaxed, everything is chill. He has a straight line from his head to his shoulder to his hip right there. Okay, so the first step is to make sure that we can get this shoulder tucked under us. So Trevor, can you bring your shoulder and tuck it underneath you a little bit? And that's gonna help him stack his shoulders in this plane right here. And that should create a little bit of a mouse tunnel underneath his downside right abs right here. Now, we also need to make sure that as he does that, he is stacked. So he's not gonna be flaring his rib cage too much doing that. You wanna make sure that if anything, your ribs are tucked a little bit in. Okay, now the second step is to exhale. Trevor's gonna exhale and he's gonna feel his rib cage come down, and he's gonna feel his downside right side abs because his shoulder's tucked under him and he's got that little mouse tunnel right there. It's gonna feel like your rib cage comes down, you get a little bit of flexion, that's okay. Now, if you're not feeling those downside side abs, what you can do, and most people generally benefit from this, is take the bottom side of your hip, so your right hip that's on the ground right there, whatever side is down, push it into the floor. And do you see how that created this movement, Trevor? Can you do that again? As he pushes that down, it's almost like he's reaching this top hip away from him because of the force going down into the floor. That should help him find more downside side abs. So he's got his side abs on, his neck is relaxed. That is the #1 key of this exercise, is can you find these downside side abs, keeping your feet flat on the wall without your neck kicking on. So check in with yourself as you do this. Are you relaxed? Is your neck 100% relaxed? That's the key. Okay, now once he's got those right side abs, he's gonna make sure that he puts pressure into the wall with his entire foot on both sides, but focusing especially on this downside right there. You only want to put as much force into the wall as you can without feeling your neck engage or without feeling your downside side abs disengage. So for everyone, it's gonna be a little bit different. The best advice I have is just use a little bit to begin with, and then slowly build up over a period of days or weeks doing this exercise. If you use too much force too early, you're gonna engage your neck, you're gonna engage your back, you're gonna lose your side abs on the downside, and that's not what we want. But eventually we should build up to the point, again, over time, where if I were to try to move Trevor's foot right here, it wouldn't really move too much, and that's the goal. So he's focused on that whole foot being flat right there, but particularly more of the inside heel and the first metatarsal head right there. And as long as he can do that, he's gonna sit there and breathe through it, in through his nose, out through his mouth. The progression for this is once you really feel like you have a good bit of grounding through this foot right here, maybe you can put about 5 out of 10 into the wall and you don't lose your side abs, you don't engage your neck even a little bit, you're going to then squeeze this ball or this object in between your knees. So ideally that object is a little bit compressible. Remember, it needs to be in the very back of our groin right there. And as he does that, he's gonna feel a little bit of muscles on the inside edge of his thighs working. And that squeeze should only be about a 4-ish out of 10. And again, if you do it too much, too hard, you're gonna lose your foot on the wall, you're gonna lose your side abs, you're gonna engage your neck. So that's the progression once you feel like you have competency in the other areas of this exercise. The most common mistake with this exercise, other than engaging the neck, is that people have a tendency to lose the downside side abs. So you gotta make sure you have the intention to keep this bottom hip driven into the floor. And you can imagine, like, if I took my hand and slid it underneath Trevor's hip, and that bone on the side of his hip right there, if he pushes that down into the floor, into my imaginary hand, that can help him find more side abs. The other thing that might help you find more side abs, if you're struggling, is to take this top arm and reach it just slightly over you, not behind you, in front of you, just a little bit. And that can help you open this space up to find some downside side abs. Lastly, if you're having a hard time shutting off your neck, you could take the pillow and just use a little bit less of elevation right there. Just make sure that you're keeping your head mostly in line. You don't want to start side bending towards the other side too much, but it can be helpful for some people to just use a neutral head position and slowly build up to a little bit more side bending to the top side. This perspective is a key component of both my anterior pelvic tilt and beginner body restoration programs. So if you're looking for more exercises that help address asymmetry, but also both sides in a way that will help improve these postures and the limitations around them, more importantly, check that out down below in the description.